24th of October 2024. This is another video of mine in the series of staring into the fire, seeing the coals and seeing the ashes. And in this one I want to talk about the situation around Louis Liebenberg and the sequestration and liquidation processes. Now, I'm not going to try and tell you the Louis Liebenberg story for the simple reason there's more than enough commentators talking about the story. I want to talk to you about the realities of what, let's call them, investors now have to face. Now, in a typical Ponzi scheme, and there is now a lot of evidence that shows that this packages thing was actually a Ponzi thing. And you must also understand, yes, it's a pyramid system, but it's an upside down pyramid. So the tip is at the bottom and the broad base is at the top. Now, what typically happens in schemes like this, the Ponzi master gets his first, let's call them investors, in, and he pays them out religiously, weekly or monthly or whatever the deal was, because those first investors, they are very important to the Ponzi master, because they are the ones that are going to do most of the sales of that whole scheme. So they are getting damn good dividends, better than they can get anywhere else and so forth. And they spread the news. And they do it quite effectively because they've got the proof. They can show their bank accounts, they can show the deposits, they can show. They've got proof that this thing is working. And they start drawing the people in. Let's take them as the middle third. They're pulling the middle third in. Now, depending on the success of the scheme, that middle third can be a big volume. And this is when the Ponzi master starts with his shenanigans. This middle third, they are going to get a portion of the promises. And they're not going to get it as regularly as the first third, the originals. But they are getting money. And that is very important. Why is that important? Because these middle block, they are going to pull more investors into the thing, because they are beginning to see that if they don't bring more investors, their own investment is going to be at risk. So they pull the broad base of investors. But they've got another role to play. The last third of investors, they're not going to see anything. And they are the ones that are going to start stirring. But this middle block that has seen some money are going to be the ones that will fight the losers. Let's call them the losers on behalf of the Ponzi master. Because they will tell these losers, if they pull the thing down, all of them will lose. Now, okay, that's a little bit of just an idea of how these Ponzi schemes works. In the meanwhile, the Ponzi master, he has done with the money whatever he planned to do with it and so forth. And it's usually when the middle third starts investing, that these Ponzi masters starts telling the people, okay, we can't pay out regularly every week now, we will pay every month and so forth, because we are now doing capital investment and there is things that needs to be built and it's time and what, all of those stories. So this middle block, they get a few bucks every now and then and they happy. The top third, the first ones, by now most of them have made a profit, they haven't lost anything. The cock is, a lot of them reinvests. Now they're no longer in the top third. They're either in the second or in the last third. And that's when reality hits them. So what they have made in profits, they've plowed all of it back into the scheme. Okay. Now something happens like we are seeing now, the liquidator steps in. Now the people, all the investors must listen carefully. There was a certain number of investors that laid charges. And these investors, they were the ones that brought the application for liquidation. They were supporting the liquidation. Now what they must understand, in the eyes of the law, those ones that brought the liquidation application, they are the ones that, in the eyes of the law, have to pursue the liquidation or sequestrations to its fullest. In layman's language, what that means is those that brought the application for liquidation, they are the ones that are responsible for all the costs of the liquidation. Think about that. They are legally responsible for all the costs of that liquidation. Now comes this other shady player into the role once that liquidation order is granted. That's the liquidators, the insolvency managers. And they've got their tasks well described in the Insolvency Act and in the Companies Act. So their first mission is to protect as much of the assets for the creditors, in other words, for the investors. So they start collecting assets wherever they can lay their hands on. Once they have collected all the loose lying assets, they start looking at what was done with the money. And that's when they see, okay, here some money was paid to this guy and to that guy and to that person and to that company and to that. And they go after that money. They want it back because those payouts were part of illicit gains. They're in their right to get or bring all that money back. And this is now where we're going to see in the Louis Liebenberg saga, a lot of the people that were beneficiaries, I'm going to call them beneficiaries, from Louis' generosity. The liquidators are going to start knocking on those doors. And those guys will have to have damn good reasons why they got paid. But the problem is they were paid with illicit money. So the chances are damn good that they'll have to pay that money back. Now, many of them can't and so forth, but I'll get to that. So this liquidators say now they collect assets. But you must also understand, in this collection process, they are running up costs that is horrendous. And they do it with no constraints because those original applicants, they are responsible for the cost of the liquidation. So these guys, these liquidators, they can't lose. Now, they're going to get to those first block of investors and they're going to say to them, all right, you got this and this and this from the system. And then the guys will say, no, but we invested. And say, all right, how much did you invest? Oh, you invested 15,000 rand and you got 30,000. We want that extra 15,000. Bring. In other words, they want all the profits that first block made. The second block has got a problem. They haven't made a profit yet. These liquidators are going to try and convince that second block to join the claimants. In other words, the creditors of that estate. Why are they going to do it? Because the more people they have as creditors, the better their chances are of covering all their costs. Now, let's say the liquidation goes fairly smoothly and there was 30 million rand of creditors. The liquidators managed to secure 20 million rand of assets. The liquidation costs were 10 million, so there's 10 million left over, and that 10 million will then be distributed among the creditors proportionally. But let's say all of these guys were now equal investors, so they will all get an equal share of the 10 million. And that's when you hear that people got out of an estate 10 cents in a rand, 20 cents in a rand, 30 cents in a rand, 2 cents in a rand, things like that. So in my example, there is now 10 million that will be spread among that 30 million creditors. So each will get about a third. And that's the end of the liquidation. But what happens most of the time is the liquidators cannot get enough assets to cover their costs. So, let's say, and this Liebenberg thing is going to be an expensive story. There's going to be a lot of court cases. So you can imagine the costs there. So the costs are going to be humongous. Far more than the assets that they could actually get. So there's going to be a shortfall on the costs. Now, let's say there's 20 million rand costs. And there's only 5 million rand assets, so there's 25 million, 15 million rand shortage on the costs. According to the law, those creditors that entered claims against that estate, they must pay the shortfall in the cost because the law says they must pursue the sequestration or the liquidation to its fullest. And this is where the nightmare starts. You have now entered a claim in that estate for your 15,000 rand that you've lost. And now all of a sudden here at the end, there's a hell of a shortfall in the costs. Now the liquidators are going to look at you for your part of that cost. Proportional, all the time proportional. And that is when the secondary sequestrations and liquidation starts happening, because they want now from you, your part of the cost is 10,000, say 10,000 or 50,000, and you don't have it. They're going to sue you for it. And if you can't pay it, they're going to liquidate you, or sequestrate you. And that's how they're going to do that and keep that whole thing. So these people that are entering claims must understand they are doing it at a hell of a risk. That is why when you go and you follow the sequestration and liquidation procedures in many of these cases, you will see that creditors abandon their claims. And they usually do it before the second creditors meeting. Because by that time they realize, oh shit, there's not enough assets here. I'm going to pick up a bloody cost order. Fuck that, I'm pulling out. And that happens a lot. So you must now think about it. The chances that in this Liebenberg case, that there's going to be a profit is extremely slim. But it's going to be a hell of a costly thing. You will see that. Teams of lawyers are going to be on this. Teams of liquidators are going to be on this. The costs are going to run like a river. But they don't care, because you that entered claims, you guys are finally going to pay any shortfall in that estate. And that is the message that I want to give you today. You must ask yourself, okay, I've lost 15,000 rand. Do I take a chance and enter a claim, or do I walk away from it? Because the chances are that if there's a shortfall in the liquidation costs, everyone that entered a claim against that estate will be proportionally responsible for that cost. Don't forget that. If it's a total lost case, it is better to walk away, because things can get nasty. And I'm talking about personal experience. I have seen in my own life how the creditors in the end paid those years, 80s, late 80s. It was a few 100,000 rand that they had to pay into those estates for costs. If you extrapolate it today, you're looking at millions. And it all happened because the liquidators were telling the creditors that they see assets that will cover everything, and the creditors will get paid. And this is what's going to happen in this. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but this can very easily happen in this Liebenberg case, that there's a shortfall on the costs. So everyone that has entered the claim will be proportionally responsible for a share of the cost. So you've lost on your investment, and now you must also pay in on the shortfall on the costs. Remember that. It is a real risk, and you better make your calculations properly before you join as a creditor in that case. And I'm going to say it again, I'm not a financial advisor. I am telling you what I saw with my own eyes happening in my own life of how this liquidation industry operates. And you must understand there's already indications that the chances of getting assets, real tangible assets in that estate together is slim, because we hear reports of millions and millions that evaporated in cash. And there are rumors about the quality of the diamonds. And so the chances of real asset recoveries are very slim, and it's going to be a more of a costly thing, because they will have to sue every recipient basically for whatever monies was paid to those recipients, because many of those recipients are not going to be paying it back willingly. Some of them had legitimate expenses that was covered by the scheme. So it was not as if those guys just got a handful of money and they put it in their pocket. They did things for the scheme that cost them money. So it's going to be a lot of fights to get the monies back that is now being mentioned in all the affidavits and so forth. And I am just afraid that the people that can afford it the least are the ones that are going to be drawn in to become creditors. And remember that. If you are a creditor in that estate, in other words, you want money from them, you are also by law responsible for all the costs of the liquidation. So the liquidators, they're happy and fine. They feed themselves first with whatever assets they can get, but if there's a shortfall, they don't worry, because the creditors will have to cover the shortfalls. Don't forget that. Please give me a like and a subscribe and share the thing. Thank you for your support.